Welcome to the Finance Marketing Podcast, a show that empowers finance professionals to market their businesses in ways that feel good and actually achieve results. I'm your host, Hillary. I've been working with folks in financial services to develop marketing strategies that work and create results-oriented marketing content since 2020. And I've learned a lot about what works in finance marketing, what doesn't work, and where financial services pros get stuck. Join us each Friday as we explore real, effective ways to market your finance business and connect with folks who truly embody your ideal clients. My guest this week is DonJay Rice, financial behavior coach and sole owner of the Drumbeat of Wealth. In DonJay's own words, prior to having the official title of financial behavior coach, he was a financial advisor for 28 years, and early in his career, he made a discovery. When people wanted to talk money, they desired more than a discussion about stocks, bonds, or a net worth statement. They longed for conversations about how money made them feel. Being a survivor of multiple childhood and adult traumas, DonJay was drawn to those who had experienced grief or trauma. They needed someone to sit with them, to help them slowly untangle and find clarity, to help hold what they didn't want to hold alone, and to discover a path forward. It became his purpose from deep inside his soul. And for the last 25 plus years, he has studied and developed tools, methods, and skills to walk with clients on this journey, using a proven process to help clients move forward while giving space to the fact that everyone's story, drumbeat, and journey is unique. Because of the way that DonJay talks about connecting with clients, including the vulnerability and the storytelling and the humanity behind it, it truly is some of the most powerful marketing advice I've heard so far. It translates to some truly powerful marketing advice. So DonJay and I dig into why vulnerability and personal storytelling are among the most effective tools an advisor has, both in the client meeting room and in your marketing. We talk about how to share your own money story in a way that opens doors with clients without crossing into what DonJay calls a vulnerability vomit, and why that same principle applies directly to how you show up on LinkedIn, in your email newsletter, and across your content. And while lots of advisors are reckoning with the fact that some of their ideal clients are now going to ChatGPT to ask for financial advice, DonJay talks about the one thing that cannot be replicated is your ability to sit with a client through their hardest moments. And that is the story that your marketing should be telling. So without further ado, let's dive in. DonJay, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so glad that you're here. It took us a while to make this conversation happen, so I know we're both so excited to get into this and be here. Could we start with you just giving us some of your background? Take us through kind of your journey and how you ended up to where you are today and what you're doing today.
Yeah, so I today am a financial behavior coach. And so I work with clients that might be spending a little too much, might be saving a little too much, might be financially enabling children, working with just tough financial emotions, anxiety around money, maybe couples that fight around money, things of those things. Yeah, that anything like that has a strong behavior, a strong emotion around money, or sometimes just a question mark of like something feels off when I engage with money and I don't know what it is. I help clients find a path forward and find alignment.
And prior to doing this work, you were a financial advisor for many years, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I was a financial advisor for 28 years and found out really early in my career, within about 3 years, 2.5 years of starting my career as a financial advisor, that really people wanted to not get into the minutia of things like beta and alpha and standard deviation and all those things. They really want to talk about how money made them feel and their emotions around money. And so I discovered that way back in 1998. And I thought, well, if I can get really good at that, like that's something that will probably always be in style and always be needed. And I think through as the world has gotten busier since then and more stressful since then and all these things, I think it's become more of a need.
Absolutely. Was it surprising to you when you discovered that a few years into your career, that that's really what you needed to be doing in your conversations with clients rather than getting into the alphas and the betas and all of that stuff?
Yeah, it was kind of eye-opening, because as a financial advisor, most of your listeners will know we start out taking are Series 65 or 66 or 7 or whatever it might be, or maybe all of them. And, we're taught to know these things. These things are important. And they are important in the background of our job, but but most of our clients would tell you like they could care less about those things. It's what can we do for them? What problems can be solved? And one of those problems is just how do we address our money? Yeah.
What strikes me is that both parts, this background, very technical knowledge, and then this emotional, then the need to be able to conduct these emotional conversations and work through these seasons with clients, both are very complex, but in very different ways. And it sounds like most advisors come into the career very prepared for one side of it, but not necessarily super prepared for the other.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's a lot of emphasis put on the training as far as all the stats and statistics and the science math of it. And the CFP designation is doing their part in introducing behavioral psychology and financial psychology, behavioral biases, those type of things. But there is an imbalance in the focus of what's being driven home. That's for sure.
So, last question just about your background, and then we'll get to really the meat of working with clients on an emotional level about their money. Have you seen your work change significantly between your 28 years as an advisor and now as a financial behavioral coach or a behavioral finance coach? How is the work different?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think there's just so much more we know about financial psychology and so much more we understand about behavioral biases than we did in 1998, for crying out loud. And so it's changed in that way. And I'm a big believer in being a lifelong learner, and there's just so much more we understand about the brain, and we understand about trauma and all these things and how it interacts with the brain. So definitely more from that standpoint. I would say from being a financial advisor to strictly a financial behavior coach now, obviously I can focus a lot more on it. The financial advisors world, there's a lot of requirements they have, by the different regulators. And so even when I was doing this as a financial advisor, there was this frustration inside me that I couldn't devote the time that I knew the clients needed in that space because of all the other requirements and the needs and things put on the financial advisor. So yeah, obviously able to focus a lot more on it. And then of course the information that we have available and understanding it all is just really mushroomed since then.
I imagine with some clients, thinking back to your time as a financial advisor specifically, with some clients, it was probably they were more willing to engage in some of the more emotional conversations about money than others. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say that we've seen a progression of that over the decades, but you've always got to meet the client where they're at, right? That's so important and so critical to judge that, whether you're in coaching or whether you're as a financial advisor. I mean, financial advising is just another level of coaching, And so, yeah, so it's meeting the clients where they're at. And I think it's helping the client, when we talk with clients, whether financial advisor or financial coach, there has to be an element of vulnerability. So we can't, as a financial advisor, I can't ask you, hey, Hillary, tell me about your behavioral biases. Here's a list. Pick the 3 that you see up most in you, and you'll be like, well, I've got your bias here packed in a sandwich here, and so we've got to be the first one to share, and so I think I always tell clients, they'll ask me, and people on the street ask me, hey, now that you're no longer a financial advisor, tell me the secret to interviewing you guys. And so I always have one question, and it's just, I always tell them to ask their advisor that they're interviewing to be their potential financial advisor, what's the biggest financial mistake you made and what'd you learn from it? And if they stammer around or, that common phrase we always used, we were taught in when we interviewed straight out of college is like, what's your weakness? Oh, I'm a perfectionist,
Right.
Okay. Nobody bought that, and
Right. It
so,
didn't work.
and yeah. And so I think we have to, as financial advisors, be really willing, open to share that. It's like, what was our biggest financial mistake? What was our struggle in that? What did we learn from that about ourselves? And how did we create a feedback loop for further improvement? And I think if we as financial advisors do that, it's so much easier then for the client to reflect. And we want to be able for them to see parts of them in our story.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but somebody's got to go first. Somebody's got to be vulnerable, and so I coach financial advisors from the standpoint of like, if you're wanting your client to be vulnerable, when they come in and they ask, hey, how was your weekend? It's okay to say like, well, my daughter graduated from high school and it was really fun and really joyful. But at the same token, it was a little sad knowing I'm going to say goodbye to her soon.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's okay to acknowledge both.
Mm-hmm.
And when you acknowledge both and you do that with your client, and we just told a short story there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they got it, like, oh, it's okay in a sad event to realize there's some joy too, and vice versa, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then we can sit down with the client and say, hey, with retirement, tell me about the happy side of that, and tell me about the side that seems a little tough or a little painful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we've opened that door. And so
right.
I think and that's what stories do for us,
right.
rather than talking about stats or statistics or studies that nobody remembers.
Right.
That short storytelling, is a great way to connect with our client and bring up emotions, bring up the psychology side.
I agree wholeheartedly. And what I'm hearing you say is money is vulnerable. We're asking clients to be vulnerable when they walk in the door, whether that's virtual or physical. And in order to make someone comfortable being vulnerable, we have to show a little bit of vulnerability first ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is the balance then between sharing your story, showing yourself vulnerably without completely taking over the conversation and making it all about me?
Right. I think, and I call that the vulnerability vomit. So, there's one of those things, like you say, when you're vomiting vulnerability, is it really, what is our goal for the story?
Right.
Is my goal for the story that you will, go, oh, DonJay, that was so hard and that was so tough and it's all about me? Or there's the goal of my story that you'll see a little bit of yourself in that story, that I'll make the story memorable, and that it drives to better outcomes for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really just remembering, why are we telling this story?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So before we hit record, we were talking through this idea a little bit, and you mentioned, this is your story, this is your life, it is vulnerable for you as well. And so how do you think about your story and how you're telling it in this situation as opposed to another situation when you are maybe looking for sympathy and it is all about you?
Yeah. I think we've got to be willing to sacrifice our story. We've got to be willing to, this story means a lot to us. And as we've sat down and we've thought about our money story, and we've thought about maybe our grief and our trauma and all those things and how they tie and relate, we've got to realize, our story is important to us. It's our baby. It's our life. But we've got to be willing to say, but does the average person in the chair care? And it's okay if they don't care, right? It's okay if they're like, well, I don't need to know that the sun was shining on that day, right? What's really important to the story to get to the goal that the client needs to get to get to the place where the client. So we really have to think about, I always think that you should, as you're crafting your story, really envision the client in the chair.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're telling them that story, do you envision what's the responses? Or is it all, are the responses all about you? Oh, that was so hard. Oh, that was so tough. Oh, this, right? Those aren't the responses I need back, right? I
Right.
need reflection back. Are they
Mm-hmm.
seeming bored? you know, they really do. Okay, what's really not important for this, for what we're trying to address here? And I think that takes some strength, and that takes really sitting with your story and
Mm-hmm.
processing your money story,
Right.
so that once we've healed our own money story, we're a lot more likely to say, hey, let's chop parts out of it to
Mm-hmm.
get this done. If we haven't healed from our money story, then wow, Hillary, I want to tell you that my whole money story, the sun was shining, the drapes were pulled on the other side when this happened, and it was dark on this side of the room. Those are important things for me,
Mm-hmm.
but it may be a sign that if I'm telling too much, maybe I haven't truly healed from this story.
It sounds to me like that's something that advisors need to do.
Yeah,
They really, in order to best serve their clients, they
yeah,
really need to sit with their money stories and work through healing from
yeah.
those.
Yeah, and it's no different than what they do with portfolios, right?
Mm-hmm.
I always called it eating your own cooking. So if I'm saying, oh, Hillary, you need to be diversified and you need so many small cap stocks and international and da 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 da, right? Well, if you turned to me and said, well, do you do that in your portfolio? Oh no,
Mm-hmm.
well, I own 2 stocks and that's my whole net worth in those. Well, you'd be like,
Mm-hmm.
well, wait a minute here, right? So we've got to be willing, if we're going to be financial advisors that are helping people with their money emotions and their money trauma and those hard grief events in their life transitions, their money story, we have to be willing ourselves to eat our own cooking, to go into those money emotions and say, what am I really feeling? What was I experiencing then? Why am I reacting this way? Because
Mm-hmm.
how can we help a client do that if we haven't done it ourselves?
So, what are the stakes, do you think? If we have an advisor who, says, no, I really only care about the portfolio and the technicalities and making sure that their financial life is truly optimized. What are the stakes there? What could go wrong if they're not having these conversations with clients?
Yeah, I think you really addressed that where you started off and you said, I really care about. I may really care about it, but does the client give two hoots? You know,
Mm.
it's no
Mm-hmm.
different than, let's say a TV. My wife and I were looking at TVs this morning, so this analogy sticks in my head a little bit, and we were talking with someone who knew a lot about TVs. I mean, this guy runs an audio-visual place, and he's like, oh, the TV can do this and this, and you can do gaming on it. And my wife and I were like, you can look at my gray hair and go, gaming's probably not my thing. I
Right.
didn't grow up in the world of gaming. My gaming was Donkey Kong at the pizza place and Pac-Man,
Right.
little Frogger, And so I said, I honestly could care less about gaming.
Mm-hmm.
And Kalisa my wife said, yeah, me too. Right. And so he shifted gears, right? He's like, well, if you don't care about gaming, da, da, da. And he realized, I think, what he was doing, because he then started to say, well, is this important to you? Is this
Mm.
important to you? Right. And he kind of re-engaged us with that conversation because I think he could tell he was losing us. I'm like, all these stats and figures and this and that. And it's like, I said, let me tell you what we use the TV for.
Mm.
And gaming was not on the list, right? And
Right.
so he cared about gaming, right? We didn't care about gaming. And so if I say, well, as an advisor, well, I started off, well, I care about blank,
Mm-hmm.
blank, blank. Mm, wow, what's the client care about? You
Right.
know?
Right. I love that as an analogy. That's such a perfect analogy. And how much quicker could that sale have been made for him if he had started with, well, what do you care about? What are
Yeah.
you looking for?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a perfect answer there. So let's talk about why you think it is so important, maybe even for a client who seems less willing to talk about their money story or their emotions around money. Should the advisor then bring up those conversations themselves and try to get them to lead them down that path?
Sure. I mean, we can't force someone to do things,
Mm-hmm.
right? People will do these things when they're willing and they're ready, but we can set up an environment that's maybe easier for them to lean into, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't have to jump in and say, I need you to tell me every money event and da 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 da. But we could say like, hey, Hillary, I always want to learn about my clients so I best serve them. And one question I've always found is helpful is tell me about your earliest money memory.
Mm.
You know, and really, and people love to tell stories. We relate to stories, but we also as humans love to tell stories. So I
Mm.
just said, tell me a story, right? And so they can tell us that story, and I can say, you know, I stay engaged with them. Wow, that sounds like that was a really important event to you.
Mm.
Yeah, it was. What do you think you brought from that moment to today in how you interact with money?
Mm.
Right. So there's some real easy questions where I always say we want it to be a conversation, not
Mm-hmm.
a scene from Uncle Buck. And so and we all I didn't have to tell you the scene, you already know, but it's Kelly, or it's a Kogan, and he's talking the 20 questions, right?
Yeah.
And John Candy's like, you know, how many questions do you have, or something like that. So yeah, we don't want it to be this interrogation.
Right.
We want it to be this conversation. And so,
As you're talking about stories, I'm thinking about as a marketer, I love stories. I talk about stories all the time. And I'm hearing you say you talk about your own money story in brief terms in the client conversations, in the client meetings to make them feel more comfortable. I think this is great marketing content as well. I think that's a really great way when you're posting on social media or you're engaging clients with your email newsletter, instead of posting that educational content that we've all seen a million times about here's what a backdoor Roth does for you. I think this would be a much more effective piece of content. People would actually really be able to engage with it. Would you agree?
yeah, yeah. And you see some financial advisors that do that on social media. And if you look at, I'm really active on LinkedIn. And so if you look at, I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well, but really active on LinkedIn. And if you see the financial advisors that are doing that and they're gaining traction, people want to hear that. I think too, an important thing to talk about, Hillary, is when we tell our stories, we always want to ask permission first.
Mm.
So we want to tell the client, hey, I've I've got a story to share that may be helpful here. Would that be okay? Right.
Mm.
And so by getting that permission, we're showing it's not about us, and we're not wanting a grandstand or anything like that, but asking that permission first. Now, we can share like that story in a snippet. How was your weekend? It's tough and hard, right?
Mhm.
But if we're really trying to share a longer story, we want to get that permission, and we want to let them know why we're sharing it. I think this might be helpful. I think
Mhm.
this might relate. So, yeah, so I think it's just really important that advisors do that. I think it's really important that they do it on social media because, like you say, we don't. I don't know that I need an advisor to tell me what a backdoor Roth is. I can Google that, or ask Chat
Exactly.
GPT or whatever that is, right? But I do need an advisor to help me when I'm looking at retirement and everyone tells me I should be happy and I don't feel happy. I
Mm.
should feel complete and I've made it at the top of this mountain and I don't feel that way.
Mhm.
Wow, this thing that I'm supposed to have been the pinnacle of my life, maybe, it's been painted that way. I don't feel that way. I need an advisor to help me like learn how to maybe reframe that or look at things or address
Right.
why is that. And I think in today's world of AI, that is where advisors really lend value that can't be replaced by a computer or a program.
I totally agree. Just last week, I was at a conference, an advisor tech conference. It was Nitrogen's Fearless Investing
Okay.
Summit. And this was just a huge topic of conversation was how can we use AI in our practices to make us more efficient without removing our humanity? Because as AI becomes more prominent and more people use it to help them with financial questions and things like that, what is the role of the advisor? And really, the consensus was the advisor provides that human relationship to walk through really hard times and really joyful times with you so that you can make decisions that are ultimately in your best interest, no matter what's happening in your life. And chat GPT or whatever tool have you just will never be able to do that, at least at this moment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think about, someone, I think about when I was a financial advisor and, you would have clients that I was the first one they called when they were fired.
Right.
Like they wanted to come in and talk that day or they wanted to Zoom that day, because they couldn't believe how they were fired unjustly. Or, we were usually the second or third call when our clients lost a loved one. I
Mm-hmm.
received calls on the weekend at home from clients that are like, I just lost my dad and
Mm-hmm.
you're the only one I knew to talk to about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that shows your connection to them, but it also shows you them wanting that connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if the client comes in and says, hey, I just got fired from the job I loved, we need to, no computer. They don't want the computer that says, well, you can roll your 401k or you can leave it or you can spend it. That's not what I need at this moment.
Right.
You know, I need someone to help me sit in the heavy. And I
Mm-hmm.
can't help someone sit in the heavy unless I've sat in my heavy. If I
Mm-hmm.
really want to get good at it, I might be able to fake it a little bit. But if I really want to get good at it, I need to sit in my heavy and process my heavy so that
Mm-hmm.
I know what that client's experiencing so I can really enter with empathy. And that's what our clients want. I mean, they want to be able to enjoy their life. They want to be able to enjoy money. They want to be able to be generous with their money, have purpose with their money. We need to help them in those areas.
Right. Right. One other thing that I wanted to circle back to is we were talking about on social media, on LinkedIn, in the emails, being vulnerable, sharing your story. And I think there's this very important distinction to be made between sharing your story and being vulnerable and trauma dumping on a
Sure,
feed. Have you heard
sure.
that term,
Yeah.
trauma dumping?
Yeah. So, yeah, so it's okay to share parts of our story
Mm-hmm.
to explain like that was difficult, right? But we don't necessarily need they need to be able to see the story, but not necessarily like experience everything in that moment, right? And
Right.
there's parts of our story it's okay not to share, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There's parts from my personal trauma that, there'll be my crew, there'll be my three or four people that are close to me that know that story intimately, and there'll be other people that might know the story but not the details of it, and then there'll be other people that just won't know the story at all. Yeah, and so here again, it's really why am I sharing this story? Is
Mm-hmm.
it to teach? Is it to educate? Is it to help people grow? Or is it for my own benefit? And if it's solely
Right.
for my own benefit, then that's something that should probably just be shared with your crew, the ones
Right.
that can really support you. Because otherwise, if we trauma dump on social media and we're doing it for our benefit, what happens when we don't get the likes, the loves, the comments?
Mm-hmm.
We're just hurting ourselves by doing that. We're throwing it out there thinking, oh, let's check back in 5-10 minutes and I should have 25 loves,
Mm-hmm.
and then we don't get that. We're
Ouch.
just, yeah, big ouch, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, DonJay, is there anything that I haven't asked you yet through this conversation that you feel like would be important for an advisor to know or take with them
Boy,
before they walk into their next meeting?
yeah. I would say with your story, sometimes we'll see advisors that will paint the story, whatever it is, all is sunshine and roses. And we don't want to paint it all as this trauma dump, but we don't want to paint it all as like, oh yeah, it was incredibly hard and I just bullied right past it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just letting your client see your humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to do that, I have to take the time with myself to see my own humanity. Sometimes we're so busy and so anxious that we haven't even taken that time. We haven't slowed down.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't gotten curious about what we felt and why we felt it.
I love that point. To me, it feels like you have to, when you're telling your stories, you have to show the nuance in the stories. And that's hard to do. I mean, we've talked about what are we going to leave out? What are we going to bring in? How is it going to serve the goals? And so that's hard to do. I mean, it sounds to me like something that you're not going to get right on the first try or the second try. And that's the whole thing. That's part of it.
Yeah. And I think part of that storytelling as you start to work with that, find those people who can really be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that stings. I shouldn't say sometimes, it usually does sting, especially the first couple of times. But find those people who can be really honest with you and say, hey, what do you think of this story as far as the goal is to blank, right? The goal is to get clients to share. The goal is to get clients to discover their own behavioral biases.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that story is accomplishing that?
Mm-hmm.
But here again, you've got to have those people that are in your corner, but they also are able to say, like, Hillary, as your friend, I want what's best for you. And this ain't meeting the goal,
Right.
And you're okay with them taking the red ink pen to it,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love that. Well, DonJay, if people want to learn more about you or get in touch with you, what are the best places to do
Yeah,
that?
so best places would be on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn under my name, DonJay Rice. If you're on Instagram or Facebook, they're under my company's name, which is Drumbeat of Wealth. And then I have my website, which is drumbeatofwealth.com. And if they just have a question or want to contact in any way, there's an easy way to click a button and do it.
Wonderful. Well, I'll link to all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much, DonJay, for coming on and sharing all of your experience.
Oh, yeah. It's always fun talking with you, Hillary.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Finance Marketing Podcast. If you're eager to market your business in a way that feels good and actually gets results, sign up for the Finance Marketing Podcast newsletter in the show notes so you never miss another episode. If you liked what you heard today, please be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite listening app and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. We'll see you back here next Friday.